Hi guys, it's Blackie. Okay, this is continuing with the MasterWoodsman Shelter Series. Now part one we talked about zero shelter, where I didn't have anything, no gear, no nothing, and I don't have the time, and so I'm forced to take shelter with what's available, trees, fallen limbs, whatever, kick up leaves, etc. In video 2 we talked about how I have time but no gear. So I create a debris hut to get me through the night. In this, we've now reached the point where we've got a tarp, a something. Now, it does not have to be a tarp. It could be a poncho. It could be a piece of plastic. It could be something you found beside the road. It could be one of them super dense waterproof wool blankets that are almost waterproof. It's just something to take shelter with, okay? In some way, shape, or form. Now, as we said, am I sheltering from the elements like rain or cold, or am I sheltering from like insects, or sheltering from some other reason that I need to put a barrier between me and it? Well, now we have a barrier. We don't got to build, okay? So let's start out with the most basic of it. What am I going to use with this? Well, the first thing is a shelter for me. Remember the old Rambo movie, First Blood, where he gets there and there's this old derelict tarp that's all ratted up, and he runs around and takes it and makes a wrap around his body, and then takes a piece of wire he finds and ties it around his body. He wears that for the rest of the show, just about. But that's because he's making a shelter around his body, okay? So let's say I need shelter, but not as in a tent, but I need something for warmth, and I have something like this. Well, a thing that you can do that is really useful, like he did in that, is we're going to create a triangle. And how we do that is we'll take one corner and we'll go to its diagonal opposite corner, like a big triangular bandana. I'm going to put those two together, and then I'm going to open it up till it's just a big triangle, okay? Now once I've got that pretty much stretched out, pulled out where it is, now I'm going to take that corner and I'm going to come back to the center again. This is going to fold the pie down even further, thickening it, trapping air, okay? Now when I say get that, I'm going to take that other corner, now the point down here, and I'm going to bring it up to the top. So now I have created a great big triangle, okay? Now with this, I'm going to take this and I'm going to wrap it around me. Put those handles right there for the moment. Pull them down to one side, grab the rest of the thing, and I'm going to wrap it around my core like this. Now I've got 4 layers around my core like this. I can hook this to this and have everything pulled up, around me like that. Now this is going to help hold my core temperature. Suppose I'm having to walk, and this isn't a poncho, but I got to come up with some way I can wrap it, drape it. This is 4 layers on my core. That leaves me full mobility with my legs, but at the same time it's made me where I've increased, allergies, I've increased my core covering on my back to help trap heat. I can also take this and open it up so it's just folded in half in that triangle, throw it around me, drape it around me like this, like a poncho. And now I have the ability to walk and be covered over most of my body. I can even hook this up over my head. Now take the two and do like that and have a walking poncho out of it to be covered and see and keep my head protected. Now I could sit down beside a tree like this and merely wrap up, because I'm not done. I'm not setting up a shelter, but I'm going to take shelter during this little patch of heavy ground. What we say in the South, hunker down. Squat down next to a tree, lean back against the truck, and then wrap around the trunk of a tree and wrap around and just put your head down and wait out the really hard weather. See? So this tarp now acts as a poncho to protect me. Same thing, wind. I can wrap it around me this way. These points can be pulled around to the back and tucked into my belt in the back, pulled around the other way and tucked it, come underneath and tuck it in and make it like a garment. Okay, so I am covered. It's super simple, but it works really, really well, and it will therefore block all the problems from getting to me and making me have trouble, and that's something I want to avoid. Okay, so we've talked about using it as a garment to get us out of rain, or just to, we're still on the move. We're not setting up a shelter. We're not stopping for the night, but I need some shelter in movement. So that's where I take my whatever and use it over my head, wrapped around me, etc. You remember this when you were a little kid and you came out with your blankie to mama calling you for breakfast. Same idea, but we're going to do it with something that's going to repel, but a blanket would work in many ways as well. So it's some sort of shelter. But what if I have something like this, but I do not have light? I've got trapped out here, it's dark, I've got out, and I don't have time to, or a way, I don't have a flashlight or anything to go and look for firewood or etc. What can I do? If I have leaves on the ground and I need to insulate myself, okay, I'm not going to be able to build a fire for whatever reason, and I need to make a stealth camp, a quiet camp or something like that, I can do this. Now I'm going to set this up out here on the ground just to show you right quick. But what you would do is you would kick up a big bed of leaves, like what you did when you were a little kid. You know, a big pile of leaves, and then you're going to put your tarp over it. Now let me set that up and I'll show you. I'm going to take my tarp, and I would have kicked up a big bed of leaves right here. Now I'm going to take my tarp, and over the top of it, I'm going to lay my tarp out. Now I'm going to go to the far point, and I'm going to put a stake down. Then I'm going to go to the south, one of the other points, and I'm going to pull it out kind of loosely, not as tight as normal. Put a stake down. Go to the far end, put a stake down. Now, what I would do would be gather up leaves and put on top of this. It's already over a mound of leaves. Now bury this in another mound up on top. Just kick up leaves and fill it up until I get a big pile of leaves. Then I'm going to go to bed, and what I do is I pick up the untacked down corner and I go underneath, under this. So I'm laying on top of the leaves, and I've got a big leaf tick on top of me. The only time you're going to do this is going to be in the winter, when you don't have any choice. I don't have any time to go gather firewood or whatever. Maybe I'm already starting hypothermia. Whew. I'm already starting hypothermia. I'm getting cold. I don't have time. Or maybe I don't have the means with me to start a fire. But I do have dry leaves. Okay? Or some other dry debris like that. Hay, straw, pine straw, whatever. I gather up a big mound of it to insulate me from the ground. I put the tarp over the top, just like this. Then I mound up like that deep on top of it, another mound of that. Now when I lift up the tarp, I can wiggle underneath the layer, and it's sitting on me like a big blanket. I'll be warm fairly quickly, and that will get me through a night. No, it's not ideal, but we're dealing with worst case scenarios here, aren't we? We've already started where I had nothing. And now we're talking about I do have something, but I still don't have time to make the perfect shelter for whatever reason. Either I'm exhausted, I can't do it, I have no fire source, or it's just not practical where I'm at. Perhaps it's something where it's so bone dry a spark could set everything on fire, and I don't want that. But I got dry leaves or dry debris of some kind. Rather than building a debris shelter because I ain't got the time, I could do this and just simply pile it up, stake it out over it, pile on top, and lift up and make a sandwich out of it. You will lift up this core, and what I like to do is kind of back under it like this as I go under, crawl under, kick it up with your feet and scoot under, kick it up and scoot under until I get this where I can pull it over my head. I'll lay like this on my arms and be able to have air, but at the same time I'll be insulated above and below, and that tarp keeps it from just simply parting away from me and leaving me laying there exposed, because if I try to wiggle into the leaves by themselves, they just fall away from me. But with a tarp spreading it out like that, and it's spreading my load out as it tries to lift, it's lifting it rather than making it flow around me. It's lifting up the tarp, see, and therefore I get a different way of doing it. Well, now let's say I've got a little bit more time, but let's flip 180. We're always talking about dealing with it's very cold. How about when it's not cold, but it's hot, and I need to make a shelter quickly? Maybe I'm starting to get heat exhaustion, and I've got to get a shelter up quickly and get me out of the heat. Well, here's how we're going to do that. Okay, now like I said, here's the scenario. It's hot, and I've got out here and I've overexerted. I'm running out of steam. I realize I'm starting to get heat exhaustion. I need to get out of the sun. Well, maybe I don't have great shade. I got shadow like pine trees, but no shade. And I've got to block a lot of that UV radiation in order to keep me cooler. And just a plain tarp blocks some, but not much. So we're going to turn it into more of a heat block. This is a summer set for cooling, okay? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take my tarp, I'm going to come up to my tree, I'm going to take a point. Now I saw this technique this past weekend being demonstrated by J.J. Morris, and it was used by the teams for rescue, and he talked about it as a way to take care of your patient. And I looked at that and I got to thinking, you know, if we did this, it'd be great. What it is, you'd make it a half of a diamond. What you're going to do is you're going to take pull it out, take your pitch stake, put it in like that, pull her good and tight, put her down, take your next tent stake, you're going to pull it out to where it goes. Now, here's the trick to it. Usually, at this point, you would pull the other half that way to form the plow point or the diamond. But we're trying to beat heat. So I'm going to take this top now, and instead of throwing it that way, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to pull it uphill like this above me. Now let me anchor that right quick. Okay. Now what you see here is a double wall, right? The sun's coming down this end. Under here is where I'm going to get. This is where I'm going to lay down, and there's an air gap. The solar radiation is going to hit this tarp here, and just like you putting your hand against a hot plate, the sun is going to heat this top surface first. That means it's going to convey and convect through. When it does, it comes to this side. This air is cooler, so it's going to flow uphill this way. So I'm going to be sucking air in at the bottom, and it's going to do this way and flow down, up, which keeps this tarp cool. So the temperature underneath here will be decidedly cooler than it would be if I just simply had the tarp flat side up there, because the solar radiation would heat it and then the heat would radiate out of the tarp like a hot rock. This forms a double layer, and I showed this trick before, especially when you're in the blazing sun of southeast Alabama and I don't have good shade. I got pine trees or something like that where there's no real shade. It's just a shadow. I need this to catch that long radiation from the sun, heat this surface, keep this surface cool, and then me underneath even cooler. It will be measurably cooler under here like this than it would be under a regular tarp. So this is a sunset. Now I lay under here, lay out flat, and that would put me in the shade and help cool my core temperature. Drink lots of liquids, bring my core temperature down, and stay out of the sun. This is a summer set for heat. Okay, now, we touched on the basic idea of we have a tarp. We've talked about how to use it as a wrap or clothing. We've talked about I don't have time to actually set anything up. All I got time to do is try to snuggle up. So I kick up a big old pile of leaves, I put my tarp down, stake 3 corners, pile it up, lift up, wiggle under. Now let's go to setting the shelter. Now at the same time, we talked about a summer shelter, a heat shelter, okay? And I'm not going to bore you with the next 30 minutes of video of here's how you set up a diamond, here's how you set up a lean-to, here's how you set it up as a flying tarp in the air. There's a 1,000,001 videos on YouTube. But what they don't show you, that's what I'm about to show you. I'm going to pass on how, once you set it up, how to run it to be a more effective shelter. So let me go to the board, because it'll be quicker than me setting it up to do a quick point and then resetting it up over and over again. We're going to do it quick and easy and to the point. Okay, let's start with the basic idea of a lean-to. Okay? Here we got the ground level. Here we have your tent stake, and here we have the edge of the tarp. We're going to say that a tree right here on other things. So this right here is our tarp shelter, and you're going to be right there underneath it. Okay? Here where the tarp comes to the ground can give us some problems. If we have a wind coming this way, it can come under that edge and into our area. And that's not a great thing, because no matter how big a fire we put in front or etc., we got a fire over here or whatever projecting heat into it, it's still always going to be a breeze. So I want to block off that breeze. Now if I set up a diamond, or some people call it a plow point, etc., this is doubly important when I'm trying to hold heat. I'm trying to create a microclimate. So I want to stop drafts, things like that as much as possible. So here in this corner, I want to put leaves on the inside. Just push up some pine straw or whatever until I block. And that will block off that airflow coming in. Next, heavy rain. Heavy rain coming down. The rain is going to be working its way down the tarp. And when it gets right here, if there's a wind blowing, it wants to blow up under here. Like when you're trying to run with the window cracked on the car and that side wind, it blows raindrops, the same thing. So to prevent that, by me putting right in that last 2 or 3 inches a wad of pine straw just pushed up there, or leaves or something, that will prevent that, because it hits the leaf and stops it right there, leak out right there. I've already got water coming off the edge of this. So I want my ground to be a little bit crowned. I do not want the water to roll back up underneath to where I'm at. So I want to select an area that's slightly crowned up, if possible. So when I put my awning, the water wants to run away. What if that's just not possible? This is where I got to be. And that is not looking too good. And oh my, it's going. So now I have to dig a trench. I'll show you that. Now looking from overhead, here is my tree, and here are my points that are staked. to form my fly point diamond. As that water is coming down here, I've already staked on the inside, but maybe that I can't, it's tabletop flat or it's a little bit downhill back into me. It's just the only place I can get. Right here along the edge, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut, here's ground level, here's the edge of my tent, of my tarp coming down, here's the stake, right there. What I'm going to do is right here where the water would sheet off, that's where I'm going to cut. I'm going to put the dirt back here up under the edge and I'm going to make a depression, okay? So that water comes off, hits into here, okay? That edge I'm going to start right about here and I'm going to run it all the way around. Now, let's say for the sake of purpose that right here is where it wants to turn downhill, okay? Now as that water sheets off, it can flow away from me. See, now this was taught heavily back in the day, but in the leave no trace days that came in the early 80s, it was frowned upon to go ahead and just make a quick trench around your tarp to get the water away from you. But back in the days when we were using canvas tarps, canvas Boy Scout tents, canvas pump tents, U.S. Army, it was standard practice to dig a little shallow trench, just like this. So as the water sheeted off, there was a depression there for that water hit, and then figure out where the downhill is and just guide it away from us to keep us from being swamped out, okay? It still works today, and you need to have this trick in your box of tips and tricks to know. So if it looks like, man, this might be heavy, heavy rain, I'll go ahead and make a little shallow trench. Go ahead and guide it away from me to try to keep me dry. On the inside, I'm going to roll up and pack some sort of debris or whatever to block that wind blowing under, to block that water blowing under. As that gust of wind hits the side right here, whoosh, if that edge does not have something on the inside, the tarp can actually lift up a little bit, and that wind, rain, water, and all this water that's sheeting off right here just blow in. Like I said, running in a car and you got the window cracked. Rain's coming off the roof and suddenly that gust of wind and all the water goes all over you and the person in the next seat over. That's what I'm trying to avoid. I'm wanting to stay dry in my shelter if at all possible. So this is a good way to do it. Now, I pointed out in earlier videos the pinning mod. And what that is right here in the center. All you got to do is just draw a line, an X in the middle of your square tarp. And right there in the center, I take a penny or a rock or something and I add a loop to it. This makes a tie-out point right there that I can pull my shelter and make my top tighter. Okay? So the pinning mod. We've got the ground. Here's our tree. Here's where the tarp is tied. It comes down. And then down here it's staked. Right here in the middle of it, we take a line and we go up to, let's say, another tree. Right here. Okay? What this does is, it gives me more headroom inside my tarp. By pulling up on that center, I can pull a line going high up to another tree or something like that to pull it up. Otherwise, this wants to sag down, see, due to gravity. So I'm adding a foot and a half to my height at the center. That also in a heavy rain is superior because in that saggy line where it's just sitting there, heavy rain wants to push the tarp down. It wants to bow down against you. By having that center penny pull out right there, I now make it tight, and the weight of the water falling in a heavy storm rolls away better. I want this pitch to be tighter. Now let me show you what I'm talking about there. Pitch is headroom, pitch is speed. Think of pitching a baseball, okay? If my tarp is not that tight, it's going to be like this. Okay? Okay. Sorry, I had an interruption. As the rain is pounding down, this is going to sag even more, and that's going to reduce you down. But if I put the penny mod onto it and pull it tight, now it's going to do this instead. See, I get a greater headroom, and the rain is on a steeper curve. This way it actually wants to bow in. In real heavy rain, it may even bow in like that. That's extreme, but you get my point. The rain may actually start puddling up in your tarp, and then you got to push it up. Back in the days of canvas tarps, you couldn't touch them. The only thing that waterproofed them was the weave of the cloth, and so once it got wet, it swelled up and therefore sealed up, and rain would just run off of it rather than coming through. But if you touched it, water started dripping because you stretched the fibers. And so we learned back in the day to trench around it, pull it as tight as you could get it, angle it as steeply as you could, instead of like that, to get the water off of it and hurry. And then we made sure that our beds and etc., we did not touch the tarp. Because if you just reached out and touched it, water went running and you flood out. Now today with seal nylons and modern tarps, you don't have that problem like we did. But still, it's a good mindset to have when you're setting up a tarp. Set it up. If it storms, it's steep. Storms is steep, pitch tight. Okay? Now let's talk about flying a tarp. Flying a tarp is simply putting a tarp between two trees on a ridge line. So here is my ridge line, here is my ridge line, here is my tarp, like that. Okay, I have a tie-out point here and a tie-out point there, 2 stakes. Okay, simple, throw it over a line and hook it, okay? But a lot of people make the mistake of understanding geometry of a tarp. If your angle of your guidelines, if you're straight coming off this way down to a stake right here, then it will pull this edge tight, but this edge is then soft and can compress, okay? If I put it too steeply that way, then this edge is soft and can flop. The secret to it is not to pull it, but pull it at this. Imagine in the center top of your tarp, imagine there's an X right there. You want to pull this line, this guy line, all 4 of them, in line with that. Like that. See, that first angle is wrong? I need it to come straight out, like that. So this one would come like that. See? Now by doing it that way, I'm putting equal force on this edge, and on this edge, and on this edge, all the way around. And that holds my tarp snug and tight. So as the wind hits, it can give a little, so it doesn't tear. But at the same time, it's not sitting there doing that in the breeze. When you have a tarp that's under tension in a storm and the edge is doing that, you're wearing out a tarp. It's flexing it and working it. And even if it's here in the middle where there's nothing tied to it, that edge is flopping. Wherever the predominant, you're taking the edge of the tarp and just working it back and forth. And that oscillation will eventually crack and tear the tarp. Any kind of tarp, nylon, whatever, will eventually give due to that. So we want our tarps are an investment, and we want them to last as long as possible. So we want to protect them. So imagining the X from the center top to all 4 sides. Okay? Now let me draw that from overhead. To reiterate it one more time. So that'd be the center of the tarp, and so your stakes would be coming right off those points. So it's equal force on all edges. Okay? That's how to fly it. Now, how high? Okay, you can raise up, term we call is flying a tarp, and make it almost flat in good weather for bigger shade, a bigger footprint underneath. But when the storms are coming, you want to bring it down. So let's talk about that a second. How to set it for storm. Okay, this time, ground level. Here is our tree, right there. And we're going to set it up so it comes out to a stick. Comes out to a stick. Okay. Now, our tarp is going across the ridgeline, and then we put an upright stick at the four corners. Hold it up like poles. Just a fork stick or something, you know, not much bigger around that. Just something to hold it up so we can walk under the edge. This will give us the maximum area under shade. Light rain, drizzles, stuff like that. That's when this works really, really well. It works really, really well under those conditions. Doesn't do good in a storm, but you know, that breeze or whatever, and I'm wanting to sit in chairs and around here and do whatever, this is the way to do it. But what happens, let's say I've got a hammock tied under here and a storm's coming. Well, then I want to drop it down steeply. Remember, pitch. Okay, now steeply. I've brought my tarp down and I'm running it straight down to the stake like I showed a while ago, the X. But this gap in here is narrow. That top is down like that, and down here at the bottom, I want it no more like 5-6 feet across. That's all I need. The steeper it is, the faster that water flows over there, and I want it gone. If I'm not going to be in high wind, I want it steep so the water gets off and gone. If I'm in a hammock, where I'm going to be up on the ground, in the air, and I ain't got to worry so much about me, it's no big deal now if the wind blows it under here a little bit, because my body is actually right here in a hammock, so that's well below me. I'll take my gear and hang it up, and now any rain or whatever that comes underneath is not going to affect me. Okay, and so that's the way I want to set it up, that way. To have the wind can blow under me, no big deal. I'm above that splatter line. Would I take it all the way to the ground? If I had a big enough tarp where I could take it and touch it to the ground like an A-frame, I mean, just coming all the way down here like that and touch it to the ground, where you had to go in the front end and the back end. As long as the rain is not going to blow down that tunnel and it's like an angle to it. Do not put it 90 degrees to the wind. You want it at an angle. Okay? So here's the wind direction. You want the side of your tent at an angle like that. Ideally like this, so the wind maybe comes under the one edge of a door, but that's it. Okay? If it's 90 degrees to it, it's going to push it like a sail. We want it to hit and go with it. So hit it and go with it, not head on into it. Okay? That's flying a tarp. You may have to adjust. I have set up a camp before, and it was a gentle breeze coming from that direction, and then the weather has changed and suddenly it's a storm front coming from that direction, and I've had to move my camp, turn the tarp around, because it would be dead wrong. And in a heavy storm, I do not want this wall 90 degrees of that wind, because it's just going to hammer it and hit it and hit it, and eventually it's going to tear it. Eventually it's going to pull the stakes out or whatever. At an angle so the wind hits it and scoops and goes around, it's okay. But head on, it's going to push it like a sail. And that's putting a whole lot of force down here on your tent stake loops, whole lot of force on your tent stakes themselves. You may bend your stakes, they may come out. You can stake it where it won't move, but then can the grommets and the tarp handle it? See, I have been asked, like, if you thought, you know, you hear a tornado coming, what are you going to do? Well, a tornado is a very distinct sound, and yes, I do recognize what that is. If I believed I was in the path of it, I would get out immediately, get out from under my tarp so I could see trees falling, etc. I would probably take my knife and immediately slash the two connectors and throw my tarp to the ground and pile something on it if I could. Try to keep from blowing away. And then I would take shelter in a low patch of ground, perhaps in a ditch if available, etc. Something to get me out of it. because I do not want to be sitting there whenever it gets there. The tarp is going to give me no shelter, no protection, and all I can do then is protect myself and the tarp, keep it from shredding up if at all possible. I'm going to get wet. It's one of the facts of life. But if I stay in my hammock and go, well, maybe it doesn't, I'm a sitting duck. I cannot see trees falling on me. I can just hear them until it's too late. I need to get out here where I can look up and be aware, situationally aware, and I can maneuver quickly. Hanging in the hammock, I cannot. Laying on the ground in a diamond, I cannot. Up under a lean-to, I cannot. If I believe I've got a severe weather occurrence happening, such as a tornado, I'm going to get out from under it and seek shelter somewhere else. None of these is ever going to hold up to that kind of storm front. And so you just got to be prepared and situationally aware and move quickly. Okay? Now, with tarps, you have the basic, here's the ground, you have the basic lean-to that we've talked about, which is just, it's hooked up here to a ridge line, it's staked in the back, and you're sitting under here. You usually have a fire out here in the front of you. That's a standard lean-to. We're familiar with that. Again, plug the hole in the back, steer it so it's on an angle to the wind, make sure your anchor point's up there, and put your penny mod to pull it out the center. Works just as good as it does on a diamond. On a diamond shelter, same idea, but now I got a wall coming down to this side and it's staked right here and I'm inside of it. It's a V around me. Better protection from wind and rain. Again, seal up that bottom edge, do a penny mod and pull it out. Even better. Flying in a tarp, just like I said. It's up over me and it's predominantly for shade at that part and light rain. Okay? Mist, little light rainfall where it's going to come over. If it rains harder and you start having pockets forming in your tarp that are holding water, you need to drop your sides down, increase that pitch to get it off of there faster. If I'm in a relatively low ground where I might end up getting a lot of water coming up under the edge, go ahead and dig your ditch. Do a drainage ditch away from it. How about a tent stakes? I want really big heavy tent stakes. There is a breaking point. Yes, I want a stake deep enough and strong enough and my cordage strong enough that whenever I put it in place, it won't easily bend or get out of the way. But it's just a tarp. With enough storm, it's going to tear the tarp. So you can carry big stakes and anchor them. Man, they're in there, they ain't moving. But if the tarp can't handle it, the tarp's going to give. And I would rather bend a stake than sacrifice a tarp. Stakes are cheap. I can double and triple stake. I can improvise a bigger stake if what I've got is inadequate. But it's hard to improvise a tarp in the field. So I have to have something to work with. Okay? To block the wind, put the stuff along the edge on the inside. In the winter, with no rain, put it on inside and outside. You want as much dead air inside of the shelter as you can get where you got the fire to your front. I want that heat to be trapped. Now let's talk about a recirculating set right quick. Ground level. I want my tarp to come up, go across, turn down, just like that. Now, I put my fire right here to the front of it. I'm going to be sleeping lengthways right here. So here's my big old feet. Right there, looks like bunny ears. Those are my feet sticking up. Okay? This is a low tent. So how do I create this? I stake down my back edge. I come up to about the midway point of the tarp. And right here, if I have two trees that are sufficient diameter for this, I will take a piece of bank line and I will make a loop from one tree around the other tree and then back. Got it? This is where it comes over first. This is second. So looking at the tree right here, I'm not making my line even around the tree. I'm tying my line on a diagonal on the tree. So this makes my front higher than that. It's a loop going around, but one's low and one's high. Just 6 inches different in height, and tie it to the tree. Now when I drape my tarp over it, it comes over the first one. If my grommet lines up great, I anchor it. The second one I drape over, and then right here on my outer corners, I'm going to pull out and put a stake on the outer corners, pulling away from me. Okay? Now what this does is, reflective heat from my fire comes into the shelter and wants to turn up. Whereas a standard lean-to, it turns up and just runs out the top and it's gone. Here it comes up here in the top and it's forced to do this. And I get a recirculating heating going. I did a hammock video a few years ago now that I did that on. I set a hammock down real low to the ground. Get my camera right now, come on now. I set my camera down real, camera. Damn it, Bear. I took the back of my tarp and I staked it straight to the ground. I came up to the halfway point, and that's where I took my 2 line to the tree and tied it. I then draped it over the other edge so it's got that slope up there at the top. And then I just rolled that last 6 inches downhill over the line and pulled it out and staked it. I built my fire one paste, which is about 3 feet, in front of where I was sleeping, like I showed there. A small fire. And then on the other side of it, I put up a heat reflector, one of those Mylar emergency space blankets that are super cheap and junk. That's what I did with it. Now, by me doing that, what's happening is the heat is coming in, rolling around, and I'm trapping that heat a little bit. Yeah, it goes out, but to some degree I'll get a little bit of roll, and you can noticeably tell it's warmer in there. And so I was able to keep a relatively small fire going with relatively little bit of fuel, but keep me warm all night, because I'm only one step away from a fire, an Indian fire. White man makes big fire that you can see from space, but he's got to run up and throw wood at it. Indian make a real small fire that he could sit right next to and nurse and keep it fed by what I put into it. And by doing that, I could go all night in it. Where did I put my tarp? At an angle to the wind, like I said before. That way the smoke didn't get trapped to me. The smoke is going that way. The wind was coming in at my head and going out toward my feet on a diagonal of where I was. So I'm getting the heat, but very little smoke. The smoke is going on by. See? Properly done, a tarp is a fantastic shelter. For one person, quick and easy to put up, quick and easy to utilize. I can set it up in multiple configurations. The last I looked up, there were 70 or something sets. And all you got to do is do a search and say tarp sets, and you'll get tons of them. You know, and you take and just practice setting it up. I do not encourage, and I said this in an earlier video, and I'm dead set against it. I do not encourage anyone to lay a tarp down and walk on it. To lay a tarp down as a ground cloth to lay on and fold the tarp over you. You don't have a tarp very long. Because what happens is your body weight, you're shifting, you're twisting, you're pulling. There's all kinds of abrasives on the ground. Dirt, sand, rock, sharp sticks, whatever, and really quickly you end up with a hole in a tarp. And you spend a lot of money for a tarp. So protect it. I never put a tarp underneath me. A tarp, as long as it's waterproof, within reason, I utilize it strictly as an overhead shelter, something to wrap around me, as a poncho, like I've detailed in this video. I do not advocate laying it down and then you fold a corner under it and that's your sleeping area and you fold the rest around. Yes, it works once or twice, and then that corner ends up with holes in it. And so the next time you go to set it up and you want to make it a flying tarp, now all your gear's getting soaking wet because there's holes in your tarp. Now, if you're going to set it up that way every time with that being the ground cloth, sure, go ahead. A friend of mine, he liked to carry 8x10 tarps because he would fold 2 feet under, and that was his sleeping area. And so it was an 8-foot square tarp, you know. And in fact, he drew a line on the tarp, you know, this is the ground cloth part and the rest. And so there was never any holes in the other, but in the ground cloth part, there were a lot of holes. A lot of dirt, a lot of whatever, and getting dirt and stuff onto your tarps, you need to be aware of that and protective of that, because what happens is that sand is abrasive. And so you have a sil nylon tarp, it's a silicone coating. You get a good pile of sand in it and you start walking in your pack and it's just sitting there shifting, sitting there shifting. And that's why you don't have a waterproof tarp. So don't drag it, don't lay it on the ground and step on it. Don't throw it down to sit on to keep yourself dry, because all you're doing is creating a new problem. And $75 or $100 or $200 is a lot of money for a ground cloth that you can make a dog food bag out of or a cat litter bag out of and just carry with you for something dry to lay on the ground. Those, I don't care if I get a hole in it. I'll put a piece of duct tape on it and I'm good. Same thing with how do you repair your tarps, Blackie? If I do get a little hole, and life's going to happen. You're going to have small limbs fall off of trees during a storm and spear you. You're going to have that snag when you're pulling it out of the car, whatever. You're going to get abuses and scrapes. When that happens, identify it, mark it, and when you get home, take you a small piece of good duct tape like T-Rex or Gorilla. Okay, and they make it clear. Okay, put it over it from the top and the bottom on a flat, smooth surface and really roll it really good with the heel of your hand. Make sure it's fully stuck, and it should last the rest of the tarp. In fact, when you look at a lot of my tarps, there's these little bitty patches where I got the tarp used or whatever, or just over time and use, she's got a little battle damage. Whenever it gets to where there's a lot of duct tape on there, well, then it turns into a ground cloth. Now I'm going to invest and buy a new tarp. And this old tarp now becomes the ground cloth. Now it becomes the thing I lay down and pile firewood on and drag back to camp. Now it's the thing I wrap up all the stuff up on top of the car, transporting so as it flaps a little bit and it's working. It's already past its prime years, and now it's in utility years. Now it's just a big sheet of something that's semi-waterproof. Okay, I don't consider it true waterproof anymore, but a leaf tick, things like that. And I've showed in several of my recent videos of my Ranger roll. That's an older poncho that's got several repairs with a big strip of duct tape on it because it had a split about 30 inches long, and I just put duct tape on it to seal it up. So now that's the Ranger roll, which is predominantly a sleeping bag, right? So it's going to be on the ground. It's still semi-waterproof. It'd do all right. I patched up most of the holes. Yeah, so if I had to use it as an emergency tarp, yes I could. I'd expect a few leaks. I've also got that emergency space blanket in there. Well, that's got many uses as well. And so tarps are by far the most versatile of anything. I can cover a hammock. I can use it as a raincoat. I can use it as a warmth wrap. I can throw it down and pile leaves on top of it, of a leaf tick, for a makeshift improv, cold weather, get me through the night survival shelter. I can use it as a sun blocker, like I showed with the V. I can set it up in 70-something configurations, all based on what my need is at the same time. Now, like I said, I don't want to bore you with 40 setups of a tarp. You probably will never need 95% of it, to be honest. My experience talking, flying a tarp, incredibly useful because I sleep in hammocks a lot, or I want to make it's a little drizzly and I want to make an area right here for you and I to sit under out of the weather, to put our little stoves on the ground and cook a little or work on a craft or just kick back and relax without getting wet. And being stuck inside of our hammocks with the hammock tarp, you know, where you're dry, but that's all you can do all day is just lay there. And if you get one of them soaking rains that's going to be going on for 2-3 days, then you got rain gear or you got your bed. Having a tarp that I can put up for a area excellent for that. So flying a tarp, real big. Setting up a diamond shelter, very, very useful, because that's my #1 go-to in cold weather if I'm sleeping on the ground. Because I can make up a big leaf bed inside of it, have it propped up with the center pulled out, and put a fire to the front of it and make a microclimate. I'm out of the wind on 3 sides. This side, that side, and back there. It's just what's in front of me. So I can catch the heat and be warm all night. Very effective. In the heat, like I showed, that V, where it's a half of a diamond, and that top half that's been folded over is lifted up to make a gap in here. So the sun heats this one, and then the air convection right here cools. It's a lot cooler in the hot summer. Even though you're standing in the shade of pine trees, you're not really in shade, you're just in the shadow. And so I'm going to need some sort of shelter. Okay. To me, the minimum shelter is a tarp. It gives me fantastic versatility, fantastic uses. They roll up small and compact. Now when you go up to tents and things like that, yes, you get a lot more room. You can express more. You can have chairs inside. You can have bigger beds inside. You can have more luxury, more comfort. But for a solo person trying to live out of a backpack, a tarp is going to be pretty good. The next step up is with a hammock, because a hammock and a tarp is just the perfect combination to me for getting through the deep south during the summer, or during even into winter when the temperatures are above freezing. I can ride a hammock and a tarp, but you start getting into the bulk becomes a problem in winter. So then it's even more important that my shelter perform as much as possible, and that's the reason I rely so heavily on tarps. Okay, this is it for the tarp on the MasterWoodsman Shelter. Next time we're going to hammocks, and we're going to talk about hammocks, because these two kind of go together. And so to me, in the progression of this, like I said, first was we have nothing. How do we take shelter out of the environment? And we talked about that, the zero shelter. Second was the I've got time, but I've got no materials, and that was the debris shelter, where I got to construct something because I can't bring nothing. The tarp, this one, where I have a cover element, I have a tarp, a poncho, something I can utilize in that way. That was this one. The next one, we're going to hammocks, because with hammocks I get off the ground. With hammocks I can camp in inclement weather, I can camp in cold weather, warm weather, bug infested weather, etc., and be comfortable. It's small, it's compact, it doesn't weigh much, and a bedroll to make me as comfortable is much bulkier. So that will be next month. That will be May's MasterWoodsman class. It's going to be the hammock. And then after that we'll go to tents, and we'll talk about tents. Hope you've enjoyed this video, guys. Thank you very much for supporting my channel, and there will be more videos coming in the future. Till next time, guys, I'm Blackie, wishing you safe journeys. Have a great day, guys.